Good evening, everyone. My name is John Ryder, and I'm the director here at the Flag Art Foundation. On behalf of my team at Flag and my colleagues at Contemporary Austin, I want to welcome you all to tonight's roundtable conversation with Lubaina Himid, Christina Knight, Assistant Professor of Art History, and the Mellon Assistant Professor of Global Racial Justice at Rutgers University, as well as David Breslin, the Leonard A. Lauder Curator in charge of the Department of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Tonight's conversation is meant to be pretty free-flowing. It'll be about 45 minutes long, followed by a Q&A session. For context, Lubaina was awarded the 2024 Suzanne Deal Booth Flag Art Foundation Prize, which encompasses the solo exhibition Make, Do, and Mend, which we're all in right now, that premiered at the Contemporary Austin in March of 2024 and shaped its way to Flag in September of this past year. The show includes 2 new bodies of work. On our 9th floor, 64 plank-based paintings entitled The Aunties, and a suite of 10 works collectively known as strategy paintings on the 10th floor. Following the talk, a limited number of copies of the catalog that accompanies this exhibition will be available for purchase, and if it is sold out, please feel free to order them on the website. I want to recognize Barbara Schroeder and Karen Kelly, our co-publishers at Dancing Foxes Press, for being here tonight. The time and dedication they put into making this book is a wonderful representation of both exhibitions. Just a few housekeeping items before we dive in. Make, Do, and Mend closes this Saturday, February 8th. And for those of you who have yet to explore the show, please feel free to stay after and take a look around. On Thursday, February 27th, Flag will reopen with our spring program, which includes a sprawling group exhibition titled A Rose Is, which centers on a 25-foot-long Cy Twombly that hasn't been publicly exhibited since it was shown in 2009. The exhibition explores poetics, language, and the iconography of the rose in contemporary art and visual culture. Opening alongside A Rose is our Spotlight series, which will include a new painting by Ellen Altfest and a commissioned text by Julian Demerick, who is an art historian and curator at the Royal Academy of Arts in London. Again, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for participating. And I'd like to hand this off to Alex Klein, my colleague, and the head curator and director of curatorial affairs at the Contemporary Austin. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, John. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief, but we're in Austin, so it would be impolite if we didn't give you a warm welcome on behalf of our organization as well. It's been such a dream to work with Lubaina to collaboratively commission these 2 stunning new bodies of work with the Flag Art Foundation as part of the Suzanne Deal Booth Flag Art Foundation Award. So as John mentioned, these bodies of work debuted in Austin almost a year ago, and it's just incredible to see how they take on a different resonance here in New York, and they're taking on new conversations. I feel like I hear the aunties saying different things and having new relationships, which was really surprising to me because I thought we had kind of gotten them all settled in Austin. But what's really extraordinary is that the book, which I don't have enough hands to kind of hold it up, is where we get to see these 2 locations come together. And it's just astounding to me how much Lubaina was thinking about place from the very beginning and anticipated how these works would live in their different contexts. So it's really, I think, the book, I can't overstate the importance of having the book. So again, thank you to our curatorial collaborators at Flag, at the Contemporary Austin, but also to Dancing Foxes as our true thought partners on this kind of final curatorial, gesture of how these works would come together in book form, and to the incredible authors, Zoe Whitley and Dorothy Price, who's with us. Your texts just add just a whole new layer to the dialogue. So, and then finally, Lubaina's own words resonate throughout this book. So you'll see a lot of different layers in the book itself. So one of the things Julie, my co-curator and at the Contemporary, and I were talking about is how much process was a big topic very early on in the making of this book with Lubaina, and process in both, how we would display the work, but how the book would start to kind of reveal the behind the scenes. Early on in the process of working on this book together, John, Julie, and I went to Preston and visited with Lubaina and Magda, and we went to Manchester, and we slowly were invited into Lubaina's home and to the multiple studios. And it was really there that I felt that we all kind of clicked in together. And it wasn't until going to your studio, Lubaina, and getting a window into your process. If you go to her studios, you'll see kind of almost like short poems written all over the wall. So Lubaina's words are everywhere, and as simple sometimes as just the word like wardrobe, and there's the coat hanging on the hook, but with Lubaina's distinctive hand. So we've tried to put a little bit of that in the book itself, and also kind of gesture to the spatiality of the experience of the. I'm gonna just Julie, can you come up here and be my Vanna White? Just look at that. If you turn the corner of the strategy paintings, you get that edge of the canvas. So we wanted to embed that in here. And so again, to Dancing Foxes, to Lubaina and your wonderful team, I think, all of these voices together have come together to make the soup, the recipe that you were talking about here. So, and then finally, thank you to Lubaina for also your vulnerability and letting us lift the curtain a little bit with you. So. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to maybe just invite Lubaina to take us into these bodies of work and the shows and the locations, so that you can all start your conversation. So thank you all. Thank you.
Oh, well, first of all, I'm sitting on a very precarious chair. And there were many chairs in my mother's house that she bought them just so she could look at them. And there were some chairs that I wasn't ever allowed to sit in. And if she'd had one of these chairs, she'd have said, "Don't sit in that chair, Lubaina. It's too precarious. You're too clumsy." So I feel very, very strange. And also,
we're with you.
Good. No, it was a great idea, though, to be able to be more in conversation with you at this height than we would be lower down. It is quite special to have to realize how many people it took really to help me understand the spaces that these bodies of work have inhabited. The team at Austin allowed a real sort of dismantling, in a sense, of their space and place. I didn't touch any of it, but when I was thinking about the materiality of these works especially, I was asking audiences to imagine taking their ceiling in the upstairs gallery apart and using parts of those rafters in that building to make these works. I wanted it to look as if I'd come in one day and taken the ceiling apart and used them as paintings. And somehow they didn't mind that the works forced you to look upwards and see this extraordinary shonky ceiling that they've got, But at the same time, what happened here was that John Ryder and the team allowed me to take the walls down that were covering the windows in this space, that had been up in this space for 10, 15 years, and let New York in. So again, the sort of generosity in completely different sorts of ways that these two sets of curators allowed made it really easy for me to think about how to make these two exhibitions, the same exhibition, work in two completely and utterly different spaces and places. And I think with the strategy paintings, of course, I was questioning the idea of how much questioning you can do in a state like Texas. And I was also, when they're here in New York, they became a different sort of questioning about the different sorts of conversations you can and cannot have. But both spaces and places really affected and is sort of embedded in the work. And I suppose I always want the work to somehow haunt the spaces and places once they've gone, so that you kind of vaguely remember them, or you just remember a moment or a thought that you had in my shows that was part of you when you go back to those exhibiting spaces and they're completely different. I just hope there's a kind of little fluttering of memory that happens. So, yeah, well, so I need to say that first of all. So I don't know if we should chat some more, or whether you want me to keep going about how these works came about. What should I do?
I would love to hear that.
I mean, yeah, of course, we want to hear how that.
You want to hear what? Okay.
I mean, I, in particular, just because we're surrounded by the aunties, would love to hear about the found materials a little bit. Because I'm thinking not just that these will haunt this space after they're gone, but that there's something about their priorness that haunts them. So I'd love to just hear more about how you kind of piece them together.
Well, they sort of come in a long line of wooden objects. In that, I suppose the very first things I made, painted wood, were cutout men way back in 1983 or something, which were cutout men with 4-foot penises. So I know, how did that come to this? But that was the 80s, okay, in London. But now, you know, we're in more serious times. But then there was a very important set of work that I made, important to me anyway, called Naming the Money. And that was a series of 100 wooden cutout figures, people, who represented, if you like, the slave servant in Europe. Those people who decorated, literally decorated, country houses, aristocratic homes, not as enslaved people working in fields in that kind of completely murderous, back-breaking, soul-breaking work, but that kind of the signifiers of wealth. And sort of in another part, if you hold in your mind the 100 figures from Naming the Money, who were map makers, herbalists, dancers, drummers, viol de gamba players, I need some help here. Toy makers, herbalists. So I love it when there are art historians everywhere, because they remember the titles, they remember the names. It's just wonderful. So thank you, Dot. So there are 10 different peoples, and then 10 of each of those. But at the same time, in my mind all the time, and in conversations, people would say, "Oh, you're going to make another 100 cutouts. You're going to make another Naming the Money." I'm like, no, it's like Bohemian Rhapsody. I can only do it once. That's it. It is the thing. That's what it is. But I started in 2014 to make a series called Drowned Orchard Secret Boatyard, which were 16 planks, painted planks, that I made for the Guangzhou Biennale. And I made them in my house, which is tall, sort of, the rooms are sort of 9-foot high ceilings, but these pieces were 10 foot. So I had to paint them. I also made the 100 cutouts in my house as well, but that's another crazy story. So I painted them quite often flat, and then when I was looking at them in the studio, they had to lean because they were taller than the room. And they were never meant to lean, but because I couldn't store them as I painted them upright, I began to then be really interested in the sort of sculptural quality of the paintings, and how they could become this sort of shaped, movable thing, and that as you walked past them, something happened. You didn't look at them straight on, there was a feeling of walking past them, and the painting changes as you move, which is of course, as sculptors would say, well, yes, but I'm not a sculptor. I think like a painter, really, that it's still, you're still, but your mind and its narrative are moving. So I made that, and then the team I had at the time said, oh, it'd be great when we were installing it somewhere else, not in Guangzhou, but later on. Oh, it'd be great if there were, twice as many, Like,
Thanks.
So then I made Old Boat, New Money for the new museum, just down the road or up the road, I forget where we are now, in 2019. And Magda Stavaska who's here, made a wonderful soundscape that accompanies and works with this piece. And it's 32, I say they're grey planks. She says they're every single colour that you could imagine, but they are supposed to be grey. But they're kind of pink and lilac, but they are supposed to be grey. And they wave and move and have cowrie shells painted along the bottom. And we were trying to make something there that was both a wave, a boat, the seashore, the sea, and the sort of creaking of, the silent sort of creaking, and a kind of strange aftermath of something terrible having happened. And then as time went by, my team and I started to talk about what was 32 and 32, and we decided that it was 64. And I said, no, I can't cut down any more trees now to make this piece. We can't do that. So we all raided every single bit of the studios, the garage, the cellars, the workshops, everything, all the bits and bobs, that artists keep. Well, I'll keep this because it'd be useful one day, and this accumulates into just, if it was anybody else, it would be kind of like a serious problem. But as an artist, it's fine. It's just collecting things because just in case I might need this to make this thing. And we also know another artist we know has a huge reclamation yard that belonged to his father. And so we also went there, and we got doors and pews from churches, and shelves, and there are bits of bed, bits of musical instrument, everything, just collected from everywhere. And then I said to them, right, we're going to make these into people. These are people. But you are going to have to learn how to put all these small pieces of wood together to make 64 people, the same height, the same width, but completely and utterly different from each other. And I had seen just some photographs of some funerary flat wooden plank-like statues from East Africa, and in all those glossy books about the art of, African peoples, of course there are absolutely stunning and wonderful examples of West African work going back and back and back. But East African objects, it's just rarer to see them. It's not, I think it's just a different way of a cultural production. I think lots of wood that then, of course, is eaten away over the centuries. And these funerary effigies were a little bit like my cutouts, but I'd never seen these cutouts before I'd made the cutouts I originally made. And that kind of really struck me. And I kept it in my mind for a long time. And when I was thinking about this work, I realized that I had become a person who, somehow or other, I'd gone from the age of 8 to the age of late 60s without kind of really realizing that I didn't realize, at all, full stop, but also I didn't really, I started to miss the older women that had been in my life, that had been in my life when I was a child or when I was a teenager. And I started to realize that, of course, as the years went by, they were dying. My aunties were dying, my mother had died. And rather than sort of mourn the loss of those women, I kind of realized I had then become one of those women and didn't see why I couldn't summon many of the sort of, not those actual women, but how those actual women might be for audiences that came. So I was trying to summon and muster and bring back or bring into being everybody's auntie. Because it seemed to me that even if you didn't have a parent, even if you didn't know your parents, somehow there will have been somehow women that came and went from the place that you lived, that told you to wipe your feet on the doormat or not to eat ice cream in the street, or gave you ice cream when you weren't supposed to have it, you know, in the back of a car, or, you know, whatever. And there just always seemed, whoever I spoke to, some women somewhere in their life, somewhere along the line, that were special in a different way that their mothers were or were not special, or kind in a way that their grandmas were or were not kind, or, you know, that there were these people that were incredibly sort of supportive, but also often rather strict but in a different way. And I wanted to celebrate that, to celebrate those women that are not necessarily mothers. They might be mothers, but then they were not necessarily mothers themselves, but were important to young people as we, when I was young, developed really. And so a combination of naming the money, the East African effigies, me and my team who had to learn how to make joints from YouTube videos. And I was like leaning the phone against a coffee cup going, oh, yeah. But as they were making them and then I was painting them, we were thinking of all those people, I think. I mean, you know, it was a long job. I mean, it must have taken maybe 9 months, or could have had a baby in that time. But we made 64 aunties. Yeah. I think about that long. Just them choosing the pieces of wood, or me choosing them, us all choosing them, and putting them together. And sometimes they fell apart, and I would say, this is the wrong YouTube video that we used there. Need to try and, you know. And then I would paint them, and then as I painted them, I was putting them into groups. There are women who are together because they like the look of each other. I will look good if I'm sitting here with these 3 people, or I will look good because they are not as attractive as me, that kind of thing that people do. Or we're going to stick together because I don't know why he's marrying her anyway. And so all of these paintings, in a sense, they've now become, in a sense, 12 paintings, are women with very strong opinions who, maybe not all of them in each group, but a lot of them are not really afraid, at least amongst themselves, of saying what they think and why, and sticking by it, really. Yes, and I think that's here we are. I think that's how we got here with those.
I mean, Lubaina, as you're describing the antis along the wall, I couldn't imagine, I couldn't not imagine them looking at us. You know, they pose and create this encounter, which I think when I first came to see your show here, I was looking for, because, you know, humans, we try to find these connections between things. You're on the first floor, you see this body of work, and you see it as one thing. You go upstairs, you have a different set of relationships with those paintings. But then I, because I'm pretty slow, realized that you're staging an encounter. There are different ways of being asked or compelled to react to something in the room. And, you know, you can't read a biography of you without it starting with your training in theater. And a question I've always had is, what do you still bring with you that training instilled in you, that you find valuable, and what did you have to leave behind? Like, why did the theater have to go for the visual art to do what you wanted it to do?
Well, I think the most important about that theatre training, and that I absolutely could not let go, is that audience is the most important thing. You can't have a performance, you can't have a drama, you can't have a ballet or an opera or a play without an audience. You can do the rehearsals, you can have the script on a piece of paper, you can do a reading, or you can have a full dress rehearsal 20 times, but it doesn't work. You don't know if the thing works until you have that audience there and they are breathing at you and you are breathing at them, and it's meeting in the middle, and they're understanding what's happening in the performance, and the performance lifts and settles, grows and dies by the energy of that audience. And performers would tell you all the time that it does matter. And I can't let that go. I don't imagine making any show I make without audiences coming, bringing their whole complicated lives, all the food they've ever eaten, all the people they've ever known, all the clothes they've ever worn, all the places they've ever been, all the conversations they've ever had, you know, the people they've loved. They bring, every single person brings all that into the room. And I feel that they are giving the work, anyone's work, that energy. They come with a generosity of coming, and they bring accidentally all that with them. And the luck and the magic happens when I've brought all that of my life into the room, and somehow there's this kind of exchange of heat and dust, and it works for the work feels energized, the audience, an audience member out of maybe 1,500 even, feel, oh, I can maybe do something tomorrow that I couldn't have done yesterday because of something I thought about, which has maybe nothing to do with the work, but was energized somehow by it. And that's, you know, I'm trying to embolden us all to make a tiny, tiny difference each, and that each of us, even this really minute thing that we think we can do differently towards a kind of common positive experience, can make the difference. And so I can't ever let that go. The shows work when I've allowed space in the space for an audience to be in the space, and where there are elements of what I make that are really recognizable and easy to speak to, so that audiences kind of get nearer and nearer. If I've painted a plate or painted inside a drawer, most of the people that would come and see the work would know what a plate is. They've used a plate, they've opened a drawer, and so there's a sort of relationship builds up, at least with that object, so you get near it, even if you're in a British gallery where you have to have stanchions everywhere. Emotionally you can attempt to get near it, and then you're in it. Then you've begun the conversation almost before you know it. But it's all about that. And I think with the strategy paintings, yes, absolutely. In Austin, we were able to do it in one enormous way, which was that the team there built tables from used wood at which you could sit and talk to your friends or to your colleagues, or look at the paintings of another 24 people sitting at tables speaking to each other, so that whatever kind of meeting or just small personal encounter you had at those tables and on those chairs, it must have had some kind of effect, not a kind of questionnaire type effect, but something, to be in the same room as 24 other people having these meetings about agriculture or about the cosmos and teeth, and how the two things are clearly connected. So I absolutely can't let that go. That audience is vital. And what I did let go, I let go actually not being very good at something that I thought I was could be very good at, in that I am less of a team player than actually I thought I was. I think I thought, I'm a great team player as long as I'm the boss of that team. I realised, sadly. And so I could let that go really easily, because I just couldn't deal with actors, directors, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't compromise what it was I wanted to do. And I think sometimes foolishly, the art world, that's much better, it's much more collaborative. But at least I can, call a tune. So I'm not sure I'm right, but that's what I let go. Feeling of it, out of control and inadequacy. No, I'm not doing that.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Is there anything about, I think in the work you have this balance between the moment of that we're in now, the encounter, but you also leave this thing that will be behind that's different than work on the stage, a different idea of permanence. Is the thing, the objecthood, did that play into this at all? Because you're such a consummate lover of these objects that you choose to bring forward and change in different ways and make us care about in ways that we didn't think we would. Like when you talk about a plate or a drawer, I'm like, I want to see that plate or that drawer that Lubaina is talking about. Is there something about the future, about where these works might be, that's different than other time-based media or performance that holds you?
Well, there's a few people that are going to say, I'm not sure you should say that, but the thing is that I make things in the same way that I used to make them when I was making scenery. So I was making them because I was making them to be used for 3 nights in a small room above a public house or in a small theatre, situation, and then take the whole thing, the costumes, the set, take it all apart and see what could be useful for the next play. So those early works I made that I decided were art and not theatre, I never really made them to last or with that in mind. And I think in a funny sort of way, although they do have a future life now, I still think probably when I'm making them, I'm sort of thinking about them for this performance, you know. And now there are people that won't let me have the paintings back, so I could think, oh, I could just put another lemon in there, or another glass of wine, or whatever, in a painting. But that does happen to me. I do see that work and think, oh, I could change them all, but as I said, there are people amongst you who wouldn't let me do that now. But I think they're made in the same way, that they're there for that performance. Yeah. So it is peculiar to see them again years and years later, or in different places. Sometimes I might use the word, oh no, it's existing work. I only want to make new work. I do wine in that way quite a lot, which my team and my friends know very well. But then when I see that work in different museums or different shows, I am often really pleasantly surprised at what they're doing differently in those different places and spaces, when I think that they've had their performance, so why do I want to see it again? And then I think, oh, yeah, I see why.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
I guess my question is sort of related, which is that, sort of related, but maybe not. There's a kind of temporality, an odd temporality to the work sometimes. So you've said that some of the characters are occupying different historical moments than others. And that to me feels very theatrical in a way. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, how you think about each of the characters in the strategy paintings and what moment they're occupying and how they're kind of speaking to our moment.
Yeah, well, it is a bit peculiar because I think I don't know. There's sometimes a plan, and well, there's always a plan. And in making the work for this prize, I had to talk quite a lot about the work before I made it, which was really, really very difficult to do, because it was terrifying to think I've talked this talk now in several different meetings, and I still haven't made it, but I think I know what it's going to be, because the curators wanted to know. They wanted to be they wanted to know. And so I made up this stuff, and then I had to do it. And so in the doing of it, especially in the strategy paintings, I often painted the place that those people were in, because the places, this gallery and Austin, and the cities in which they managed to function in their completely different but quite kind of unusual ways, both places, the place was important. So quite often I would paint the place and then the people and then the objects. But the people, you're right, in a lot of the paintings that I paint with people in them, they know they're in the room, but the other people in the room don't always know whether they are in the room really, or whether the memory of them is in the room. So that kind of comes and goes. I think it's like I don't have brothers and sisters, but if you knew them, obviously you knew them when they were small children, then you're at the winter Christmas table with them, and you're all 45. Those nuisance little children are still there in the room. So they are there, and they are not there. And then, one Christmas, your grandparent is not there, but let's all have that cake that grandparent really liked, even though then not there in the room. They are there because we're eating that cake. So lots of that is going on in those people paintings. It's about how you keep seeing people you once knew, or you see people you do know as they once were, or you see yourself in the mirror where you were once, glorious and young and beautiful, and you didn't even know when you were that thing, and now you realize that you were better looking than you were, and nobody bothered to tell you. I mean, so there are those light things, and there are those really sort of serious things as well. And the strategy paintings, yes, are all about trying to solve enormous problems by listening, really, rather than by talking, strangely. That I sort of think that the answers are found in the listening rather than the talking. How long can you listen without trying to take control of the situation? Can you keep listening and keep trying to work it out rather than starting talking too soon? But in that kind of process between, as I often say, the question and the answer, all sorts of things that you know and that you remember, or that you remember that you know, but you didn't remember that until you had to answer a particular question, flash through your mind, and people come and go from that. What that teacher said, or what that guy at the bus stop said, or what that person in the novel said. And that comes and goes. So all the time that's shifting. And quite often I think when I look at paintings that I made some time ago, I think I do know who's in the room and who isn't. But upstairs, those are still shifting quite a lot. But eventually I think, no, I know you're not really in the room. But the people in the painting are trying to work that out sometimes. I think that's, yeah. I don't know.
We're all going to be listening now. I had one thing, because in hearing you describe that encounter of these, all the temporalities that we hold, or the encounters that we hold, or the hairlines that we had that we kind of bring into these experiences, you kind of pose this thing, which is, we have this one body, each of us has it, but one wonderful possibility is that we have these brains that can be holding multiple things together at once, or changing ideas, or can handle, God forbid, some kind of ambiguity. And I think sometimes, because we're humans, we do this again, we apply language like, oh, it's a surreal painting, or there's surreal elements, which gets away from the real kind of description of it, which is it holds tension or ambiguity, or poses ways that other things could be. So I wonder, in addition to this, what, in some ways, what terms, what language has been least helpful when people encounter your work? And in some ways, when you are describing this work, it's in a much different way than, I think, our flattening of language around figuration or the surreal or whatever can sometimes break down the complexity of the work itself. So I don't know if that's a question, rather more than just a way of kind of posing some ideas of the complications of looking at the work. I mean, I think it was only yesterday I was talking and sort of every time I sort of talk about the work, I do understand something different
about it. And I think I realized only recently that, in a sense, I am trying to put into paintings an awkwardness, as something that isn't resolved, because it seems to me that nothing is resolved. Yeah. The day is not resolved. Nothing is resolved. So everything is shifting and changing. So in the paintings I make, it's really important that there isn't a resolution, that there are maybe possibilities of that, but there are possibilities of something unraveling. And if I painted the people in too much of a photorealistic way, then their fluidity and their ambiguity and the awkwardness of the situation might become too fixed. If I paint the folds and the creases of the cardigan, then it becomes about how accurately I can paint the cardigan, rather than I decided to put this cardigan on because this is the costume I wanted to wear today. So it's not about the cardigan as a piece of clothing. Those people are wearing their costumes. They're wearing today's conversation or today's language. I kind of believe in the sort of speaking clothes in a way. And so because of that, then the people in the paintings, I think, have a sort of otherness and awkwardness and not a photorealism and not a hyperrealism, but not cartoons, and not. I think it's to do with that when you're speaking to people, even people you really know, you keep getting glimpses of who they are, and then that slips, and you remember things that they said previously while they're saying something in the room to you now. And I think I'm trying to get that into a painting too. I'm trying to get the gaps between the question and the answer, because a lot happens in that gap. But I'm also wanting to get the glimpse of understanding that you get in the present, in the room with a person, but also that something of their grandmother that they brought into the conversation, a phrase perhaps, or a word, that you didn't even know that word because either it's not your language or you never heard it said that way before. But that I'm trying to get that sort of shifting. And if I make the figures too real, then they can only be doing one thing. And I'm trying all the time to get them to do what people do, which is like sometimes too many things at once. So I think that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
I'm wondering if maybe this is too simple of a question, but color, the saturation of the color is doing a lot in these paintings in terms of the address. So I wonder if you could talk about how you choose these colors, the richness.
I could, but the thing I try to do, and I've said this lots and lots of times, as I'm trying to paint the perfect grey painting, I'm trying to paint the kind of paintings that Northern Europeans paint, that British painters paint. There's 50 browns and 60 greys and lots of shades of black and dark blue, and I make my way towards the paint and something happens. And I think, I will paint, I quite often paint a whole floor or a whole section, a whole wall, a grey that I've kind of summoned, which Magda would say isn't necessarily a grey. but then a yellow speaks to me, and I have to mix, 4 or 5 yellows together to make that grey really work. And then next to it, there needs to be this kind of lilac next to a purple, because the grey will look better. And on it goes, and I end up like that. But I think that the colours speak to me like, but I don't do it at all, but like novelists say that characters speak to them. I think novelists quite often, I've heard them speaking a lot about how they write, is that they invent a character, little Jane, who's going to, go to school in Minneapolis or whatever, and she sets out one day to go to school, and she encounters a really nice dog or whatever on her way to school, and strikes up a friendship with the owner of that dog, or the little boy who owns the dog, and suddenly it was going to be all about Jane, and suddenly it's about the little boy that owns that dog, and a character comes in that you never thought you were going to introduce, and then they take over the whole story, and then the whole narrative becomes about them. And little Jane in the beginning was just the fabulous grey that could not have happened. The whole story couldn't have happened unless she had opened the door at that moment, gone down her path, her first day at school, and encountered this little boy with his mum and the dog. So I think that's what happens to me. I mean to do this, and then the painting sort of, the painting becomes a sort of problem that I like to solve. Because also painting, for me, every day that I'm doing it, is I paint in order at the end of the day to feel quite clever. It's like, that's quite good, that's really quite good. And then you go the next morning, it's not so good, and you have to dig your way out of the kind of problem that you've caused for yourself. But it's like that, it's a whole thing of, it's a Rubik's Cube as well. You put this colour, and then I have to put that colour, but if you've put that colour next to that colour, then you've got to put that colour. And so but then you might have to change the first colour. And that has happened in paintings often. In order to make a painting happen, I have to lay down something, and then quite often I have to take out the thing I first laid down. So the painting's doing a lot of the work, It's speaking and saying, you have to do this now.
I do feel like, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of times when the grey shows up, it is the sea.
Yeah, but that's because I live in the north of England.
Sometimes it's a simple answer.
And the sea is like what we in the north of England call washing up water. So you've washed the dishes, if you were hand washing dishes, because that's a giveaway to, previous lives. But anyway, in England, you used to do washing up in a washing up bowl. Right? It's really peculiar and quite disgusting. But anyway, you do the washing up, and the water is dishwater colour, and in the north of England, on the west coast, that is the colour of the sea. Any day you go, that's the colour of the sea. So I think that happens, and I think it's the island also that I've ended up in. I was born on an island where the sea was not that colour, but in Britain, you're not very often very far from the sea. I don't know how many, I'm going to look at an art historian now, how many miles you are from the sea. It's never very far. Maybe 50 miles, really. It's kind of really extraordinary. And so being on an island is quite particular. But the sea round most of the coast of Britain is that colour. Because it's cold and, I don't know, something to do with oceans and weather.
Yeah.
And I think also the thing about the sea is that it is a place. And I think it's not, for me, it isn't something, I never go swimming, ever. And I never go swimming in the sea. I just say that. But it's a place. And it's a place of deep sorrow and great trauma. And it's all about power and about, ownership and murder and all those things that have shaped, especially, have shaped the entire world. But, you know, how the British were with their huge confidence of commanding the seas has produced, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years of sorrow. And I think it's impossible to sort of think about the sea as a pretty place, as a beautiful, luxurious, exotic place, because even in the places where it is this wonderful turquoise or azure, it sort of isn't. It may be that colour, but it isn't really that thing. It's too much been a source of, the taking over of places. It's used constantly. And if you look at paintings, as I have done, you know, for many, many years, I look at a lot of paintings painted by British painters of the sea, and it's a thing, you know. It's more art historians will say it's more than a thing. It's a sort of it's a genre. It's, you know, but I wonder what it must have been like to see the sea when you had never seen it before, and then have to get in this thing called a boat that you didn't know what that was, and then be in and on this thing called the sea and not know what was going to happen to you. So and really not know, and then when what happened to you did happen to you, you couldn't ever imagine that before you went in this place. But there's also a question that comes to me a lot, is how can I paint the sea as if I'd never seen the sea painted? Because in Britain you see a lot of paintings of the sea. It's a very much a thing that sort of has been in the past a sort of thing of great prowess. How sea-like your sea can be. But it's about paint, and I don't want it to be about paint. I want it to be about that place, those places. So from washing up water to...
I think now might be a nice moment to open it up to the room. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free. On the back.
Oh.
My question is more for David and Christina. What was the first time you encountered Lubaina's work, and was it in a museum? Was it in an art history lecture like mine? Just curious about that.
Yeah, it was pretty magical, actually. So I ended up at a Middle Passage conference in 2018 in Leeds, and Lubaina was giving the keynote. I hadn't learned about her work before, but it was like a showstopper. I mean, it was all that anybody talked about for the rest of the conference, and so then I just became kind of obsessed. But your work has a kind of magical, I know I'm overusing that word maybe, but my sister once sent me a painting of yours, and she didn't know anything about you. She said it looked like me. It's a woman, I think, wearing a yellow shirt, and her hair's in a low bun. And then I randomly walked past it on the High Line once, and do you know what I mean? It's like that sort of thing where it's like somehow you've intersected with my life in all these kind of beautiful ways. And so when things like that happen, I'm just like, I need to know this artist. I need to I need to commune with this work and understand, basically.
Yeah, and mine was in reproduction. I was a studio assistant for the artist Jenny Holzer, and I remember going through files, and it might have been a Havana biennial where you did a project where you made cutouts of all these women artists. And I'm like, what is this? And I thought this was a pretty incredible project, and why did this artist choose these artists and in this particular place for this particular show? I'll ask you about that later because I still am interested in knowing that. But it was through a black and white reproduction.
Interesting. So I achieved grey then because you saw it in black and white.
I know.
Okay.
I just had a question about the aside from height, do you also consider the depth and the weight of the objects as you're painting them? Or is it just because that's how they are in and of themselves?
Sometimes they're bigger and thicker and deeper than I might if I had made each one myself, rather than sometimes allowing my team to do exactly what they wanted to do. There are ones I never would have made in that way, but then when I had them there to paint, then there was a weight and a depth that was a gift to me because I could paint the sides, or it suggested a colour that I wouldn't have done had they been flatter. I mean, that was the exciting thing about making this piece, is how much exchange went on between us, you know. I give you this idea, you give me this wood you found in your mum's garage. I say, let's put this wood with these woods and spread this bit of piano over several things rather than just one. And then I go away for a week and you've added some bit of, you know, great big thick piece of pew to it. But that spoke to you, so it's fine. And then that makes me paint in a completely different way. So it so much was, I considered it, but not in advance. Like there was a plan, like I said before, there's always a plan, but within that plan, things happen and change. And I tend to attempt to go with it, dig my way out of it, solve the problem of it, rather than undo it. I think.
You've mentioned a few times novels and just now Jenny Holzer, and I'm wondering about your relationship to literature. Are there any books that you have a special affinity for, or maybe read while you're making work?
It's quite difficult to read and make work at the same time, but I do listen to work. But I know exactly what you mean. You mean when I'm not actually painting it, am I reading novels? I always, my whole life, I was reading novels. You know, since I was really, really young. Because none of this is sadness. I was an only child. Hooray! I never had to share anything. Fabulous. I didn't even know what sharing chocolate was till I was about 35. When someone said, yeah, really. When someone said to me, you know, like when you've got a thing, you know, you sort of need to share it. I'm like, oh, do you? I didn't know that. I've learnt now sharing menus, you know, all that. So I know that now. But I functioned, and I still function quite a lot of the time, as an only child. So I was reading all the time because those were the people that I got to know. So I was reading, and not because I was so clever either. I wasn't that clever, if you know what I mean. I just loved to eat novels, or short stories or poems. So that's always a constant from very young, from, you know, the kind of things, I don't know, just everything. I read everything. French, not in, always in English, but, you know, French novels, Russian novels, plays, everything. And of course, a huge significant thing was in the 1980s, early 1980s, when in Britain we came across Toni Morrison, Tony K. Bambara. Probably The Salt Eaters is probably a deeply important book for me, because it doesn't go in a straight line. It doesn't. You don't know always quite what's happening, or quite who someone is, because they sort of become someone else. But yeah, there are so many books that have really, really been significant. But I think that I have no idea how to write a novel, and I don't really have any desire to write one. But I really love to read them. But it is an odd thing. I do listen to audio books, but when I'm painting, I tend slightly to listen to books about painters' lives, bizarrely. They keep me company quite a lot. But quite a lot of the ones about British artists, those audiobooks, are read by very, very posh English people. And you hear the artist, because you obviously can put recordings of those artists in these things. And in Britain, in between the First World War and the Second World War, those painters were also very well-spoken men. And so quite often I'd be painting something like this, but listening to Lucian Freud talking about Francis Bacon in a terribly poker English accent. So, but it's kind of there's still, because that was never the way I was an artist in that kind of way. I know a lot of artists, and most of the people I know are artists, but we don't seem to quite function in the way that those men did in London between the wars. Somehow, other than what we do, we just don't seem to quite live like that. Or even anyway. So in a way, those people's life stories, those stories of their supposed everyday, are a bit like novels, because it's sort of real, but not really real, So yes, I like to fill my reading and listening with people. I do listen to a lot of music as well, but quite a lot of that is voice, is singing, from opera to everything. Everything, in a very geeky way. I just listen to everything. I'm not an expert at any of it, but I just like it. So there isn't really one special book, but I think I'm really glad I read The Salt Eaters in 1983 or 80-something or other, because I think I understood that doing something differently, and then where I sort of did understand the life, but I didn't understand it. Toni Cade seemed to me to be writing what she wanted to write, not in order to write the great. Clearly, the people that write great novels don't necessarily set out to write the great novel, but there was something about the way she was writing that was just, these stories had to be told, these relationships between these people had to be explained or taken apart or put back together, and I think that's probably one of the most important books. But it's a terrifying book, so it's frightening to read too. Woman on the Edge of Time, another terrifying book, but really important, about being here and not being here, growing old, growing mad. Another evening we could talk about books.
Maybe just one more question, and then we're done. All right, we are done.
It's okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thanks. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Okay. Yeah, thank you.